When you reach a certain stage in life, patterns become easier to recognize. You've witnessed public rivalries flare up and fade away. You've seen celebrities apologize, reinvent themselves, and sometimes repeat the same mistakes. And somewhere along the way, you begin asking deeper questions. At what point does entertainment stop being entertainment? When does rivalry stop being competitive sport and start becoming personal warfare? And what happens when family, wives, children, even deceased parents, gets pulled into the arena? That's exactly where the recent conflict between 50 Cent and the Harris family has led us. What started as familiar hip-hop tension escalated into something far more layered, uncomfortable, and revealing, especially for those old enough to remember when certain lines simply weren't crossed. The moment the tone shifted. 4 weeks, 50 Cent and T.I exchanged sharp commentary online. Nothing new there. Hip-hop has always been competitive. Lyrics challenge credibility. Interviews spark debate. Social media adds fuel. But then something changed. On February 22, 2026, 50 posted an unflattering image of T.I.'s wife, Tamika "Tiny" Harris, to his massive audience. The caption dismissed her involvement and implied she had stepped into grown folks' business. Pause for a moment. If you've ever been married, ever defended your spouse, ever felt protective over someone you love, how would you react if millions were invited to laugh at them? Would you tell yourself to stay calm? Or would something instinctive rise up inside you? For many, that's where this stopped being entertainment. Because bringing a spouse into a feud shifts the battlefield. It changes the energy. It introduces pride, loyalty, and emotion that go far beyond lyrical sparring. A son steps forward. The reaction didn't come from T.I immediately. It came from his son. King Harris, 21 years old, went live on Instagram. There was no PR filter. No scripted messaging. No strategic delay. Just raw emotion. He defended his mother. Angrily. Visibly hurt. And to many older viewers, this is where generational contrast becomes impossible to ignore. Those of us in the 40 to 65 range grew up understanding an unwritten code. Disagreements between men were handled between men. Family, especially mothers, were often considered off-limits. The code wasn't perfect. It wasn't universal. But it existed. So when King escalated the response by referencing 50 Cent's late mother, Sabrina Jackson, who died in a house fire when he was a child, the tone shifted dramatically. Now ask yourself, when someone invokes the memory of a deceased parent tied to childhood trauma, is that still competition? Or has it crossed into something heavier? Trauma isn't content. 50 Cent's loss has long been recognized as formative. It shaped his worldview, his resilience, his distrust. It's part of his origin story. When that wound is touched publicly, especially by someone from a younger generation, it becomes more than a comeback. It becomes emotional territory. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Social media doesn't measure trauma. It measures engagement. King didn't stop there. He referenced 50's strained relationship with his son, Marquise Jackson, a father-son conflict that has played out publicly for years. It was effective. It was painful. It was personal. But was it wise? Generations at war. To understand this moment, you have to understand contrast. 50 Cent built his career mastering provocation. Long before TikTok, before live streams, before viral outrage cycles, he understood how to bait reactions and control narratives. His battles with Ja Rule, Rick Ross, The Game, and Fat Joe weren't accidents. They were strategic, calculated, often profitable. Controversy, for 50, has historically translated into momentum. King Harris, however, belongs to a live stream era. Reactions are immediate. Emotional responses are permanent. There is no cooling-off period before millions witness your anger. 2 days after his Instagram outburst, King released a diss track titled "Made Man Luxury Cars." Defiant lyrics. Clear message. He would not tolerate disrespect toward his family. The question isn't whether he had the right to feel angry. The question is whether anger should be weaponized publicly. Is defending family always justified, regardless of method? Or does the method define the maturity? Enter Boosie. When Boosie Badass weighed in, people listened. Why? Because Boosie speaks bluntly, and because he has lived through consequences beyond social media commentary. Boosie acknowledged what many quietly felt. When someone mentions your mother publicly, emotions override logic. In many communities, a mother is sacred ground. He understood King's anger. But he didn't endorse the escalation. Boosie pointed out that 50 initiated the personal turn by bringing Tiny into it. That's where the battleground shifted. Yet he cautioned that invoking a deceased parent moves conflict into a darker space, one that rarely ends cleanly. And here is where maturity offers clarity. By 40 or 50, many of us have learned that retaliation rarely repairs damage. It multiplies it. We've seen feuds spiral into lawsuits, violence, broken relationships, and regret. Boosie also warned about legal consequences, speaking from experience. Reckless pride can carry real-world outcomes. And when his own son, Torrance Hatch Jr., briefly inserted himself with heated remarks, the situation evolved from two men into multiple families. Now ask yourself, when children inherit their parents' public battles, are they defending legacy or inheriting unresolved conflict? The versus that never happened. To understand the roots, we have to rewind. During the pandemic, versus became a cultural phenomenon. Two artists, 20 songs each. Nostalgia, celebration, competitive spirit without hostility. T.I repeatedly campaigned for a versus battle with 50 Cent. He believed his catalog could stand toe-to-toe. And it wasn't an absurd claim. If you lived through the 2000s, you remember the dominance. The radio hits. The club anthems. The cultural footprint. It would have been compelling. But 50 declined. Consistently. Instead of engaging musically, he revived old allegations that T.I had cooperated with law enforcement in the past. In street culture, those accusations carry weight. Here's another layered question. Is refusing to battle musically a strategic move? Or does it signal something deeper? Ego, pride, unresolved resentment. And why did that unresolved tension eventually spill into family territory? The snitch narrative. Boosie's involvement isn't neutral. In previous interviews, he accused T.I of cooperating with authorities, claiming he had documentation. That accusation lingered in hip-hop circles. Yet even with that history, Boosie believed 50 went too far by bringing Tiny into the feud. That contradiction is fascinating. It raises an adult-level question. Is it possible to criticize someone's past while still believing certain lines should not be crossed? Mature audiences understand complexity. Life rarely offers simple heroes and villains. People can be wrong in one area and right in another. That nuance often disappears in online debates. The algorithm effect. Let's address something uncomfortable. Social media rewards escalation. Outrage generates clicks. Conflict generates comments. Personal attacks generate engagement. Algorithms do not reward wisdom. They reward reaction. So when 50 posts something provocative, he understands the digital mechanics. When King reacts instantly, he feeds the same machine. But who benefits most? The artists, the fans, or the platforms collecting ad revenue? When deeply personal pain becomes viral content, does anyone truly win? Parents and pride. If you're a parent, consider this. Would you want your child fighting your battles publicly? Or would you hope they learn restraint you didn't practice yourself? T.I and Tiny likely feel both pride and concern watching their son defend the family name. Pride because loyalty matters. Concern because public conflict leaves permanent footprints. And if you're a son or daughter, here's another question. Is defending your parent about honor, or about proving yourself to the world? In youth, proving oneself can feel urgent. In maturity, proving less and protecting more often becomes the goal. Legacy versus ego. What makes this situation resonate with older viewers isn't the insults. It's the implications. Reputations outlast viral moments. Children grow into adults who must live with the digital echoes of their youth. Parents eventually confront the reality that their public battles shape their family's narrative. Hip-hop has given us rivalries that were theatrical and entertaining. But this feels different because it touches trauma, generational loyalty, and unresolved wounds. It forces reflection. What example is being set? For young artists watching, is escalation the blueprint? For fans, is loyalty defined by how harshly you retaliate? For families, where does protection end and pride begin? The broader cultural mirror. Zoom out for a moment. This feud isn't just about four public figures. It mirrors something larger in society. Blurred boundaries. Private pain is monetized. Emotional reactions are live-streamed. Trauma is meme-ified. And silence is often mistaken for weakness. But maturity teaches something quieter. Sometimes restraint is strength. Sometimes silence preserves dignity. Sometimes stepping back protects more than stepping forward. Final reflection. As this conflict continues to unfold, headlines will come and go. Diss tracks may trend. Interviews may dissect every word. But beneath the noise lies a deeper question. When personal wounds become public weapons, who truly wins? Is victory measured in streams and views? Or in the ability to walk away with dignity intact? For those of us who have lived long enough to see cycles repeat, this moment feels less like entertainment and more like a cautionary tale. Because legacy isn't built in viral moments. It's built in the choices made when emotions are highest and cameras are rolling. And perhaps the most important question of all is this. What lesson will the next generation take from watching all of this unfold? Will they learn that respect still matters? Or that outrage is the new currency? Only time will answer that. But one thing remains certain. When family enters the battlefield, the stakes are never just about music anymore. His message was simple. No versus. No battle. Stay away. That curt line carried more than a refusal. It carried a warning wrapped in the kind of economy that only decades in the public eye could buy. 4 years, it was the pattern. One man would issue an open challenge, the other would reply with a wall of irony. Memes, trolling posts, a clipped reminder of previous slights. It was strategic theater. It turned music into character study, and character into commodity. But by February 2026, the cadence of that ritual broke. The echo turned to something louder and harder to control. It began like many modern music conflicts do, a public appearance. T.I, measured and deliberate on the surface, said on a major podcast that respect had eroded. He said he had lost respect for 50 Cent. Those are words that can crack armor. They can be shrugged away. In many earlier skirmishes between heavyweight rappers, the initial salvo was shrugged, cataloged, turned into clips that became social media seconds of content. This time it was different because someone answered with a move that crossed an unspoken line. 50 posted an image that involved T.I.'s wife, Tiny. Ask yourself, when a rivalry shifts from the professional arena into the private sphere, when family is weaponized, does the conflict itself change shape? T.I. reacted in a way that honored his history. He returned to the studio. Within days, 2 tracks dropped, sharp and focused. 2 blades aimed not just at ego but at narrative. He referenced 50's personal life in ways that felt like an escalation. The tone was the old-school lyrical warfare. Hard bars, direct calls, the kind of lines that demand a response not in 280 characters but in music, where cadence and contempt mix. For fans steeped in hip-hop's traditions, it felt like a reversion. It was music as weapon again instead of media as theater. But music is louder when it's paired with images, with family, with legacy. And the culture reacted accordingly. At the center of the conversation, commentators split the field and made choices that reflected their own histories and instincts. Charlemagne the God said what many listeners heard, that 50 was responsible for dragging the fight into personal territory. Charlemagne framed it as a failure of judgment. Public shock at a move some feel was beneath even a public enemy. On the other hand, DJ academics presented it as a play for narrative control. To him, trolling and pushing personal buttons were winning strategies in the social media era. They were a sort of psychological versus in which the scoreboard is public sentiment and clicks, not verses and cadences. Joe Budden, quieter in this instance, offered a different kind of analysis. He reminded listeners of rules, signed and unsigned, within hip-hop culture. Budden argued that 50s trolling style often succeeds because it traps opponents into emotional public reactions. But when the opponent answers musically, it complicates the game. Budden also sounded the most cautionary of notes. Conjuring the dead, invoking deceased family members, slides a contest into a place where repair becomes nearly impossible. And that, tragically, was where the exchange moved. King Harris, the son of T.I and Tiny, entered the public fray. The moment a child becomes part of a dispute, particularly when family matters are invoked, the lens through which any observer judges the dispute shifts. For parents, guardians, grandparents, the sight of a young person reacting to a parent's public shaming is instinctive and often painful. Imagine your own child seeing you attacked across millions of screens. What would you want them to do? How would you want them to respond? King's reaction was raw, sincere, and at times unnerving. He was not merely a bystander. He felt, viscerally, the weight of an assault on his family's honor. Some viewers lamented that a son had been pulled into adult warfare. Others defended him, saying that the emotional response of a child is as human as any adult's would be when the private becomes public. Meanwhile, 50s social media behavior shifted as well. Posts specifically referencing T.I began to vanish. Others remained, laden with the kind of half-smile provocation that keeps an audience guessing. Was he recalibrating? Was this a strategic retreat? Or was he letting the situation simmer in the public eye because simmering was the most profitable state? Boosie, watching from the wings, offered his take, and in doing so, widened the conflict's orbit. He critiqued both sides and found himself pulled into the swirl that had grown faster than any single individual could have intended. His involvement proved the point many had been making. Once ignited, conflict rarely stays contained. It spreads through networks, cliques, podcasts, barbershops, living rooms, until everyone feels authorized to weigh in. As February waned, the industry's usual signals persisted. Diss tracks streamed in rotation, playlists curated themselves into camps, and social media filled with snark and analysis. Yet the central question remained, thudding like a bass line under the hashtags. When deceased parents are mentioned in a rap feud, where does the conflict go from there? Hip-hop's DNA has always contained bravado, trash-talking, and lyrical mockery. The genre's competitive fire drove talent to sharpen lines until those lines stung. But woven into that dynamic are rules, sometimes explicit, often implied, about locality and dignity. Family, and especially deceased family, historically sat inside a cordoned space of reverence. Crossing it has always carried consequences beyond the chart. Have those rules dissolved? Or has social media amplified behavior that might once have been admonished privately? If the genre's unwritten laws have shifted, what does that mean for the artists who built the culture? For those of us who remember the golden eras when feuds were settled on the microphone and in the studio rather than across feeds and highlight reels, the stakes feel higher. Those memories are not nostalgia so much as a historical ledger of what hip-hop has endured and sometimes destroyed. Another variable complicates the dispute: legacy. T.I and 50 Cent are no longer simply rappers with mixtapes and radio hits. They are businesses, brands, and cultural institutions. 50 Cent built television and product ventures that reach audiences beyond the music world. T.I carved pathways into film, television, and entrepreneurship. These men sit at intersection points where their public personas feed into complex empires. When men in their 40s and 50s pick public fights, their motivations, risks, and calculations are different than when they were in their 20s. Are they protecting brand equity? Seeking to stoke relevancy in a noisy attention economy? Is it old pride, unfinished business from youth, or a calculated attempt to secure streams and headlines? Or could there be something more elemental at play? The same human insecurity that has always driven artists to test their boundaries? We heard a lot of that debate in commentaries. Some argued that the feud served as a cynical content engine, one that would generate downloads, guest appearances, and renewed public focus. Others suggested it was a stubbornly human thing, two men with complicated pasts and complex relationships looking for a way to reclaim respect. And for the audience, why do we lean in? What do we want to learn when two cultural giants are at odds? The answers are messy. There is the base human curiosity. We like drama. There is also a deeper sociological pull. High-profile conflict performs as a mirror, revealing current cultural values and the fissures in how we handle transgression. It fuels podcasts, bar-side conversations, and every kind of click-based engagement. It also reveals something unsettling. Social media rewards escalation because escalation gets shares. Boosie's commentary crystallized another significant worry. Where does an apology live in a world of public provocation? If someone were told to dig up a mother's grave, is there a path back from those words? Can a phone call, a private conversation, or even a public apology stitch back together the fabric that public humiliation has shredded? For many watching, especially those aged 40 to 65 who've seen both the costs and the remedies of such fallout, the answer seemed obvious. Some lines, once crossed, leave scars that time cannot erase. And yet, within hip-hop's long arc are redemptive stories. Rivals have reconciled. Public apologies have been given and accepted. Men who once spat venom have sat together on stages or talk show couches, discussed their faults, and reframed the narrative. So the question re-emerges in another form. What does winning mean at this stage of life? Is winning about social media points? Streaming numbers? Or is there a higher currency? Dignity, family protection, legacy preservation? To answer that, you have to understand the human beings behind the public personas. To watch this story without seeing the years and choices that formed these men is to read a headline without reading the book. So let us look, closely, without caricature, at the characters and scenes that made this moment combustible. Cent and T.I Harris on a winter morning in Atlanta is a study in careful contradiction. He is a man who built a persona around Southern swagger and intellectual frankness, who knows how to be charming on camera yet guarded off it. In the early years of his career, he learned to control narrative with an old-school instinct. Speak in sound bites that fit, and when possible, keep emotions in the studio so they can be shaped into art. But when someone aimed at his family, his reaction was shaped by another education. The one that taught him being a protector is not just rhetoric for interviews, it's a lived obligation. In the studio, the feel of his sessions carried a ritual weight. The room is dim, amber light pooling in the corners, a half-empty cup of coffee on the console. A horn sample loops, a low bass pulse under it. T.I moves through lines with the cadence of a man who knows his voice can become both shield and sword. He remembers early battles when every line meant survival in more ways than one. Survival of reputation, of being taken seriously. That history is why when he responded with diss tracks, he addressed not just the insult but the framing that had allowed the insult to happen. He wasn't just firing back. He was reclaiming the narrative. He thought about legacy, not in abstract terms but in domestic ones. How would his daughter or his son, or his grandchildren, read this public fight in 20 years? Would they see a man who stood for something or someone who had traded dignity for headlines? Across the country, 50 Cent, Curtis Jackson, had his own calculus. He'd built a brand that thrived on blunt, theatrical statements. His early career worker bee hustle translated into a persona that never feared controversy. For him, provocation was a tool sharpened into a career. He had seen the market bend toward spectacle. He used spectacle like a craftsman uses a tool. Yet intimacy mattered to him too. In private, he kept a small circle. Public posturing was often a performance that hid more complex motives. When he posted the image about Tiny, was it cruelty or a strategic cut designed to push a man who would answer? In the calculus of provocation, 50 knew the variables. The social media algorithms that magnify response, the producers who would pick through every clip, the podcasts that would analyze every bar. He also knew the risk. That family is different, and weapons aimed at family can cut inward unpredictably. Between them, there were memories layered into the feud. Past slights that felt larger because of accumulated history, business overlaps where alliances and rivalries had hardened, and the inescapable media machinery that amplifies everything. But what of Tiny, T.I.'s wife? Quiet for much of the public spectacle yet present in its fulcrum. She is more than a figure in a post. Tiny's life has been both publicly dissected and privately held. The public post struck at not just a spouse but a person who had her own identity, ambitions, and memories. And the consequence of making a spouse a symbol in a feud is often the reduction of a human life to bait. Check this. When a spouse becomes a symbol in someone else's conflict, what is gained and what is lost? The grief line, so often avoided, resurfaced when King reacted. He was young in the public eye but old enough to feel the sting of public humiliation. His posts were not polished. They were immediate. They were human. The rawness of youth, unvarnished by PR consultants, is an uncomfortable mirror for a culture that often favors curated emotion. His reaction forced the public to confront something simple. Beyond streams and celebrity, there are real families. Behind every public statement, there are private rooms where children sleep, where parents argue quietly, where the small rituals of domestic life give shape to identity. When a feud bleeds into those rooms, the damage is not just reputational, it is intimate. Watch the barbershop conversation. Men leaning forward, clippers idling, heads nodding to points and counterpoints. Some say King had no business in it. Others call that expectation unrealistic. How do we expect children of public figures to behave when the world around them treats their family life as headline fodder? There are no easy answers, only observations and discomfort. Public commentators, Charlemagne, academics, Budden, Boosie, formed a chorus of competing logics. Charlemagne's moral center urged caution. Academics' media-savvy approach read the fight as content. Budden's measured warnings pointed to the danger of invoking the deceased. Boosie's voice brought in an older, cultural sensibility, the kind that sees escalation as a societal hazard. But commentators are part of the drama too. Each takes a side, not just because they hold convictions, but because they occupy roles in an ecosystem where opinion is inventory. Their interventions alter the dynamics. A shout-out on a morning show can amplify a line. A stern admonition can reframe public sentiment. They aren't neutral observers. They are actors in a feedback loop that makes resolution harder. What responsibility do cultural gatekeepers carry when they remark on public conflict? Is the obligation to truth, to temper, or to ratings? Does commentary create pressure to escalate, or does it provide space for de-escalation? The practical consequences of the feud were tangible. Cancelled or uncertain appearances, deals put on pause, marketers watching with ledger books open. When public figures feud, the cost is more than just pride. Sponsors measure risk. Networks examine liability. Managers calculate whether association is worth the potential fallout. But beyond the ledger, there's reputation. For men at the height of their brands, reputation is a long game. It's the bridge between present action and future opportunity. Burn it carelessly, and it's not always reconstructible. So what is the value of a hot moment versus a sustained legacy? Is it better to win a viral night or to be remembered as someone who chose restraint at a precarious moment?